Welcome everyone to our monthly webinar series. This month, we're going to talk about an integrative approach to sleep. So to start out with, what I'd like is for everyone to put in the chat box, what is one health measure that sleep is associated with? And I'll give you a minute to do that. And Emily will be monitoring the chat box and questions throughout this webinar. This is a quote that I love by the Dalai Lama: sleep is the best meditation. And I think that's very true. So what are we going to cover today? First, we're going to kind of go over what an integrative approach means. Then we're going to talk about why sleep matters. We're going to talk about some behavioral interventions for sleep. We're going to talk about the chronotypes of sleep, the genomics of sleep. We're going to talk about molecules that can help us with sleep. We're going to talk about some sleep tips, tricks, and hacks. We're going to talk about tracking sleep with biofeedback, and we're going to talk about some cutting-edge treatments. And again, any questions that you have throughout this, just put them in the chat box and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. Any questions we don't get to, if you want to just leave them there, we'll send you an email response when we send out the webinar that will talk about the answers to whatever questions you have. So first of all, let's talk about what an integrative approach means. And for those of you who came to my webinar last month, this is going to be a review, but I think it's important to go over this again. So integrative medicine, first of all, is evidence-based. So everything that we talk about has evidence. And integrative medicine, I think of as the umbrella under which all other forms of healing with evidence lie. So under the umbrella of integrative medicine is craniosacral therapy, energy medicine, functional medicine, naturopathic medicine, regenerative medicine, conventional medicine, osteopathic medicine, massage, sound healing, etc. All those are under that umbrella. So what we do at Boost is we try and look at, hey, how can we approach whatever is out of balance in your body? What modalities can we use to help get your body back in balance? And we use sometimes things that are 5,000 years old, like Ayurvedic techniques, and sometimes things that are cutting edge that have only been around for a year. And we try and combine the best of all these different types of techniques to help you get your body back in balance. If we look at a 35,000-foot view of disease versus health, and this again is review from last month, but again, I think very helpful. So I think of our health. We look at all of our biologic systems. If our biologic systems are stronger than all the internal and external stressors that our body is having to navigate, then we have health, as you see with this seesaw. When we think about what the biologic systems are, they're all of our systems throughout our body: metabolic systems, detox, immune system, etc. Stressors in our body are things like infections, injuries, deficiencies. Also, not getting enough sleep would count as a stressor. So if the seesaw tips in the other direction and we have too many internal and external stressors compared to the robustness of our biologic systems, then we have disease. So I always think about that and talk about that with all my patients, that what we're always trying to do is try and minimize any of these stressors and try and maximize our biologic robustness. And then we stay healthy and happy. If we zoom in a little bit more, I like to think about our primary 4 pillars of health, and they're nutrition and gut health, stress, exercise, and sleep. And so today we're going to be focusing in on sleep with this. This is another quote that I love: a good laugh and a long sleep are the 2 best cures for anything. All right, so now what we're going to jump into is, why does sleep matter? And I think this slide alone, if you don't take anything else from this presentation, this slide alone really illustrates why sleep is so important. So twice a year, we have time change. In the spring, we have spring forward, where we lose an hour. And then the fall, we of course gain an hour. So when we spring forward, the day after, there's a 24% increase in heart attacks, car accidents, and suicide, which is pretty astounding. Conversely, fall back, when we gain an hour, it's a 21% decrease in heart attacks the next day. So that fact alone really illustrates how important sleep is, outside of any other evidence. I think that sleep is probably the single most underutilized and free performance enhancer. And this goes for sports and activities, but also cognitively, problem solving, creativity, studying, learning new things, etc. And I think we just undervalue in our society sleep. There's quotes like, you can sleep when you die. And historically, there's been this real tendency to put people on a pedestal that can get by with only sleeping 4 or 5 hours a day. We know that people like that, you know, for example, previous presidents that only slept 4 or 5 hours a day, they end up, when they get older, oftentimes developing diseases like Alzheimer's dementia. And probably a lot of that is from chronically being sleep deprived. All right, so why does sleep matter? So if we don't have optimal sleep, that's correlated with increased death, increased fat, increased heart attacks, increased rates of depression, increased rates of cancer, and increased inflammation. People who don't sleep adequately, people who sleep less than 6 hours a night, have a 4% increase of death in the next 10 years. That's pretty astounding and pretty significant. We know that people who don't sleep enough end up having a higher likelihood of obesity. Obesity is correlated with things like cancer. We know that higher likelihood as well of a worsened body composition. And a lot of this has to do with impaired glucose metabolism and hormone regulation. What are the hormones that are involved with hunger? Ghrelin and leptin. So I always think of ghrelin as being the one that's like, grrr, I'm hungry. So ghrelin is the little red hormone on the right there. And what happens is when our sleep is dysregulated, for example, on shift work, in the middle of the night, what happens is our body gets a little confused. We release ghrelin in the middle of the night and we go for the high calorie, oftentimes nutrient devoid foods like donuts. I tell people that, you know, I'm trying to reverse the damage that I did from working the ER and eating donuts at 3 a.m. for many years. Leptin is a satiety hormone. So leptin gets released by our fat cells and tells our body that we are satiated and we're not hungry. Ghrelin, on the opposite end, is released from our stomach and tells us that we're hungry. So if we have too much ghrelin, not enough leptin, we're going to eat more, and then we end up putting on pounds and having metabolic dysfunction. Heart health is super important and has a high correlation with sleep. So you have a 48% higher chance of a heart attack if you're sleeping less than 6 hours per night. Which is, again, quite astounding. And when I'm saying sleeping less than 6 hours, that's not being in bed less than 6 hours, that's actually sleeping less than 6 hours. So most people who are sleeping 6 hours actually probably need to be in bed more like 7 hours. So a lot of people, on average, Americans are probably only in bed about 6 hours, which means probably Americans are only sleeping 5 hours. Depression, huge correlation as well. 75% of people with depression do not get adequate sleep. And that works in both directions. So people who are depressed are more likely to not sleep well. And if people aren't sleeping well, they're more likely to be depressed. So it works in both directions. Cancer as well. We're always looking for ways to decrease the incidence of cancer. We know that there's a positive correlation between decreased inadequate sleep and prostate and breast cancer. We also know that those taking sleeping pills have a 35% higher risk of developing cancer. Now, people have asked, you know, with sleeping pills, what qualifies as a sleeping pill? So sedating sleeping pills such as Ambien or taking Valium or Benadryl, things like that, that block our REM and deep sleep, certainly we can understand how those could negatively impact our health and increase our risk of things like cancer. Other pills that are designed to help us sleep potentially are not going to be harmful and increase the chance of cancer. So examples of that, you know, melatonin, we're going to talk about a little bit later, but melatonin actually seems to have a protective component against cancer. So even though people might take melatonin to help them sleep, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have a higher risk. However, whatever underlying is causing people to have difficulty sleeping, that itself might be increasing the risk of cancer. So if someone is under significant amounts of stress, and that's why they're not sleeping well, that alone might increase their risk of cancer regardless of what pills they're taking. We talked last month, and I talk a lot of times with my patients about the word inflammaging. So the idea is that anything that causes our body to get inflamed is going to accelerate aging and everything associated with aging. All the diseases that we think of as diseases of getting old really are diseases of inflammation. And I really like this pictorial to kind of show that. The lower right hand corner here, you can see that pretty much all the diseases that we think about, heart disease, autoimmune, arthritis, diabetes, et cetera, they all are correlated with increased inflammation. And so anything that we can do to decrease inflammation is going to help our longevity and health. And we know that adequate sleep decreases inflammation. right now we're still in the middle of this COVID pandemic, and we always have infections in the winter. So although I talked about this last month, I think it's important to just revisit this, that shorter sleep duration actually is going to increase our risk of infectious illness. And so specifically with COVID-19, for those of you who listened to my webinar last month on COVID and an integrative approach to that, anything that is going to help decrease the inflammasome activity, and that little icon on the right there is the inflammasome, and that basically is implicated in the infectiousness of COVID. And so sleeping more is actually going to decrease that and decrease inflammation, and therefore decrease our likelihood of developing COVID and getting a severe COVID infection. This can be extrapolated to other viruses as well. Another thing is adequate sleep is also going to ensure that we're getting enough melatonin, and melatonin also seems to play a role in reducing the virulence of COVID. So another reason to get enough sleep currently is just to decrease your chance of having any problems with the current pandemic. All right, next thing we're going to move on to is behavioral interventions. So I like to think of everything through the lens of what did our ancestors do? And the reason is, if you look at the time that humans have been alive as the length of a football field, 100-meter football field, the current time that we're living is only about the final meter. And so we have not had time to evolve to the environment that we live in right now. So our ancestors lived without electricity, they lived without pesticides on foods, they lived without plastics, they lived without EMF, all these things. And it's really only been over the past 100 to 200 years that we've been exposed to all these things, and we haven't been able to evolve. And so that's why we end up having a lot of problems with health in general. So if you think of like, what would your ancestors have done, and try and as much as possible live like them, in all likelihood, your body is going to be more balanced and you're going to feel more healthy. So from a sleep perspective, that means sleeping in a dark, cool environment and having a consistent cycle. So our ancestors would wake up with the sun in the morning, have their days, and then go to sleep when it gets dark. And oftentimes they would be sleeping in a very dark environment without any sort of heat source. And oftentimes it'd be quiet as well, particularly if they were living in something like a cave. So to try and mimic that as much as possible, and to try and take advantage of the way our body has evolved with that, I always recommend that everyone try and get outside and get light first thing in the morning. A good night's sleep really begins with first thing in the morning. So if you get out first thing in the morning, your eyes are exposed to that sunlight, that's going to start your day hormones being released, things like cortisol, and that's going to help to start the cycle that's going to allow your body to wind down at night. And so everything that you do during the day is going to impact your sleep at night. If you have a stressful day, and we all know this, if you have a stressful day and you go to sleep thinking about the stress, you're likely to not sleep as well. And so doing things that are going to kind of mitigate stress and help your body relax during the day is going to be helpful. Exercise, super helpful as well. Darkness. So sleeping in a dark environment is super important, and that is hard these days. We have LED lights everywhere. We have all sorts of gadgets. I recommend having blackout curtains in your room in the evening as soon as the sun goes down. So imagine that, again, if you were living outside when you're camping, and probably a lot of us notice that when we're camping, it's pretty easy to sync our sleep and we sleep better. And part of the reason is that it gets dark and cold at night, and that signals to our body to go to sleep. So we can hack that even if we're not camping and living inside by wearing blue light blocking glasses. The ones here in the picture, the orange ones are I think of as kind of the best blue light blocking glasses, but they can be sometimes distracting if you're doing work. So you can get clear blue light blocking glasses during the day that I often wear when I'm on the computer, just to help with eye strain, and certainly in the evening if I'm doing work. I would recommend, as soon as the sun goes down, start switching to blue light blocking glasses. You can put light bulbs in your house that are going to get rid of the blue light basically at night. So I have red light bulbs that I have in our bedroom at night, so we're not being exposed to that blue light. Other ideas that you can do, if you have gadgets in your bedroom, clocks, etc., you can put tape over the LED lights. Believe it or not, even just having an LED light on the other side of the room, if you wake up in the middle of the night or as you're going to sleep, that will keep your brain stimulated, and it'll hamper that melatonin from getting released, which is going to hamper your sleep. Cold. So ideally we want to be sleeping in an environment that's about 65 degrees, potentially even colder, but certainly not warmer. So that can be easy depending on where you live. It can be inconvenient though. If you're running heat in your house in the winter, right now it's quite cold where I am. It's probably 3 degrees Fahrenheit. So if I'm running heat in the house, maybe I don't want to open the window at night. And that's very energy inefficient. But what you can do is you can use mattresses such as this Uller that runs cold water through the mattress protector, basically, that then you can set what temperature you want to be sleeping at. So, and if say I like to sleep a little warmer than my partner, maybe I set the temperature to be a little bit warmer, my partner sets it a little bit colder, et cetera. So you can kind of dial it in. We all know that everyone has a different optimal temperature. And the other thing is, if it's not cold enough, deep sleep is not going to be initiated really well. So it's nice to have the nice thing with some of these gadgets is you can have them start at one temperature and then drop colder and then warm up later as it's time to wake up, which is pretty slick. People ask about, hey, what about the EMF? What about the exposure from these? Most of these gadgets have that in mind, and you're not being exposed to significant EMF. And they also have the lights that they turn off, so the LED lights aren't keeping you awake at night. Quiet. I think we all know that it's harder to sleep when it's loud. Some hacks that you can do for that are earplugs, some sort of device that's going to create some white noise or pink noise. I like listening to binaural beats. So I have a binaural beat app that I play delta waves at night that has like a brook noise in the background as well. So that not only does it create white noise, it also has the delta waves, which in theory are going to stimulate deep sleep as well. One note on binaural beats is if you're not actually feeling the vibration, it's not as beneficial. I certainly don't have like big speakers in my room creating vibration, but I think even a little bit of binaural beats is going to be helpful, even if you're not getting that full vibration. All right. The next thing we're going to move on to is the chronotypes of sleep. So there's a great book called The Power of When, if you haven't heard of it, that kind of basically talks about that we're all different. And we know this, we're all different in terms of genomics. We're all different in terms of microbiome. We're also different in terms of what time of day is best to do what, when are our optimal times. And I think we know that. We talk about, early birds and night owls. And if we are not living in accordance with our optimal chronotype, that's going to affect our sleep. So for example, if my chronotype is such that I should be going to sleep at 9 p.m. and my work is such that I work until 11 p.m. and I can't go to sleep until 1 a.m., I'm fighting that all the time. There are certain hacks you can do, taking things like melatonin, but ideally, if you can live with a schedule that's in accordance with your chronotype, that's going to help you to sleep and help you to stay less inflamed and help you to stay healthy. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of the chronotypes. And I think it's kind of a fun thing to do a little test and kind of figure out what you are and what other people are who you share living spaces with. And then ideally, you can maybe kind of figure out something in between. So the bear chronotype is the most common chronotype. 55% of people are bears. They are most productive between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And their sleep schedule is usually they go to sleep at 11 p.m. and wake up at 7 a.m. The next one is the dolphin chronotype. So this one is only about 10% of people, and they're much more variable. They will sleep at different times and they're productive at various times. So they might have like a little creative burst late at night. They might not get very much sleep or have naps during the day. You can imagine if you're a dolphin and you're with a bear, that might be a little bit disruptive to both schedules. The wolf chronotype, 15% of people are wolves. These are usually more of the introverted type. They generally go to sleep at midnight or so and wake up at 8 a.m. and they're most productive from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then the final is the lion chronotype, and they do best going to sleep around 9 p.m., waking up at 5 a.m. 15% of people are lions, and they are most productive from 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. So if you can identify which chronotype you are, and if you can arrange your life so that you're sleeping during the time that is going to allow for you to be the most optimal, and that you're doing work during your most productive time, that can be really helpful. There's various exercises you can do also during the day to see when you're most productive. Like there's an app where you can check your tapping rate, for example, and you might find that, you know, for you from 10 to 12 in the morning is a super productive, high productive time for you. And then maybe from 8 to 10 p.m. or maybe from 4 to 6 p.m. If you can identify those times when you're most productive, you can plan to do your focused work during that time and do non-focused work during other times. So I think I always look at ways to kind of play to our strengths. And I think this is a way that we can play to our individual chronotypes. And then people always ask, how much sleep do you actually need? So I would say, since I started digging into asking people how much sleep they're getting, I'll ask people, do you get enough sleep? And a lot of people will say, yeah, I sleep great. And I'll ask how much they sleep. And they'll say, oh, I sleep for 6 hours a night and I do great. For most people, that's simply not enough. Most people need to get between 7 to 9 hours of actual sleep, which means they need to be in bed for 8 to 10 hours. And depending on your genomics, you might be more on the side of you need closer to 9 or maybe closer to 7. And that's something that we can dig into. But regardless, almost no one is going to be optimal with 6 hours of sleep. All right, so let's talk about the genomics of sleep. So this is a pretty busy slide. It might seem overwhelming, but I'm just going to talk about 5 different SNPs, which are single nucleotide polymorphisms or genetic variants that can impact our sleep. So more and more at Boost, what we're doing is kind of looking at genomics as kind of the foundation for everyone's health. So I look at everyone individually at, hey, what for you is going to help optimize to put your body in balance. So if I'm having trouble sleeping and you're having trouble sleeping, my solution is going to be very different from yours based on a lot of things, but genomics is a great initial start. And so we're lucky to have amazing software through Wild Health where we can combine your genomics and your labs to see what's going to be optimal for you. So a few of these genomics that I think, a few of these SNPs that I think are super important for sleep. One is a MTNR1B, and that is useful at looking at sleep and eating relationship. And so what that means is if I have that SNP and I eat late at night and then I go to bed right after, that is going to increase my chance of developing things like cancer and not sleeping well. And so if someone has that, I'm going to recommend that they eat earlier in the night, eat before the sun goes down. The next one that we look at is the ADORA2A, and that is a correlation between caffeine and sleep. And so for some people, caffeine is an amazing performance enhancing drug. For some people, it's probably neutral in general. And for some people, it's actually quite harmful. And when people have the ADORA2A, if they have caffeine kind of at any time of day, it's likely that's going to impact their sleep that night. So even if you have 1 cup of coffee first thing in the morning, that's definitely going to still be in your system at night, and that's going to be impacting your sleep. So for people with that SNP, I recommend to stay away from caffeine in general. The next one that I'd like to mention is the MTNR1A. And this one is important for people who are doing shift work. So basically anyone who is doing any sort of work that's going to disrupt their circadian rhythm, we know that people do better in general with everything if they have a regular rhythm. So go to sleep at 10 p.m., wake up at 6 a.m. or whatever it is. I did shift work for many, many years. And for many years, I could have been sleeping or working at any hour of any day of any week in the entire year. And that is super disruptive to your circadian rhythm. So for people who have that SNP, it's particularly disruptive and it increases the chance of developing cancer. Things that you can do to kind of hack it a little bit is taking molecules like melatonin. But in general, when I see people with that SNP, I strongly recommend that they adhere to a normal schedule. And that's actually one of the reasons that I decided to finally get out of shift work completely, because I have that SNP. Next one is the NPAS2. And that is looking at the correlation between sleep and cancer risk. So for people who have that SNP, if they have bad sleep, they're way more likely to develop cancer from it. Now, as we talked about earlier, for sure, anyone who's just not sleeping well in general is going to have increased inflammation, increased risk of cancer. But with this SNP, it's even higher. And then the FAAH is useful for looking at whether or not CBD or THC can be helpful for sleep. There's been a lot of information, a lot of hype around CBD and THC over the last few years for a lot of medicinal uses. And I talk to patients about the benefits of CBD and THC all the time, but it's actually not helpful for everyone. So for some people, it could be really helpful. For some people, it actually could have the opposite effect. So I think looking at that can take out the guesswork. All right, now let's go into molecules that can help us with sleep. So the ones we're going to focus on primarily are melatonin, CBD, phosphatidylcholine, GABA, magnesium, and tryptophan. And this particular supplement that I have a picture of here is by Quicksilver. It's called CBD Synergies SP. And it's a liposomal delivery supplement. It has melatonin, CBD, phosphatidylcholine, GABA, and some other herbs that help with sleep in it. Squirt it under your tongue. Because it's liposomal delivery, it hits you pretty quickly. It's great for initiating sleep. And then I think it's also great if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're having trouble getting back to sleep, to kind of help you get back to sleep because of the really fast action. So melatonin is really an amazing hormone. And when I first started hearing lectures on sleep in my integrative medicine fellowship a few years ago, I really became convinced that probably most people would benefit from taking melatonin. It seems like all of the sleep researchers are taking it in lower doses. It's super helpful for sleep. Higher doses, it has a really great antioxidant, anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory profile. It kind of seems like there's almost no reason not to take it. There's no negative feedback loop, which meaning that you're not going to decrease your own endogenous production. It's very safe and well tolerated. It's useful for sure with shift work. And if you're doing any traveling, I like to use a combination of the liposomal form that I just showed you, in addition to a sustained release melatonin. So the interesting thing is, if you go to the store and buy melatonin, usually it'll be 1 milligram, 3 milligrams, 5 milligrams, something like that. I will use sustained release micronized melatonin doses up to 50 milligrams with people. And it's a really potent anti-inflammatory, really potent anti-cancer, helps because it's sustained release, it helps you to stay asleep. And then just to mention with melatonin, I think I mentioned before, it's when we're exposed to all these blue lights at night, it actually is preventing us from producing our own melatonin. So those blue light glasses really help. And I notice myself for sure when I put on those orange glasses at night, like almost immediately, I just feel like it's time to go to sleep. Similar to if you're outside camping and the sun goes down, you start to feel like it's time to start getting ready for sleep. Another thing I'm just going to reiterate from last month is melatonin is actually helpful in terms of COVID and infectious diseases. So it is going to help decrease the activation of the inflammasome that's known to be correlated with COVID reproduction. And then we also know that we have a decrease in melatonin as we age, and that's probably partially accounts for why kids don't seem to have as severe of symptoms in general with COVID as adults. And then the other thing in terms of treating with COVID is it reduces oxidative stress. And so when people, particularly with the Delta variant, when people are getting all sorts of oxidative lung injuries, melatonin seems to be quite helpful for that. And then for a more virus treatment, oncologic treatment, the doses are higher. So I have 20 milligrams here, but really it can even go up to 50 or 100. It's not, people worry about, oh, can I overdose on it? It's not like you're going to get more tired with having a higher dose. You're just going to get more of some of those other benefits. And believe it or not, the lowest doses are actually the best for initiating sleep. So I believe that liposomal supplement that I was showing you only has 0.25 milligrams of melatonin or something like that. So very small amounts are actually better to initiate sleep. All right, let's talk about CBD for a minute. Ever since CBD became legalized nationally based on its efficacy with seizures on a patient in Colorado, we've seen the industry just blow up. And I think it's great. And I think it's also important that we look at it through with a cautious lens, because not all CBD products are identical. So if someone goes and grows a bunch of hemp plants and is spraying them with pesticides and makes a CBD product that is not very bioavailable, you might have to take that entire bottle in order to get a therapeutic dose, and you'll be ingesting a ton of pesticides, and it also will be expensive. So I look at products that do not spray and that are they're packaged in a way that makes it more bioavailable. So basically nano-emulsified liposomal products that make it so that we can actually absorb it. So these are all products that you put under your tongue and you let it sit there for a period of time, and it absorbs faster that way. So the two of the ones that I've found, I'm sure there's lots of others, are Quicksilver and Ojai Energetics. And I have no connection to either of them, but when I first started getting into this, a lot of people had a lot of questions about CBD. And so I did a deep dive a few years ago and have gone to a lot of lectures, and it seems like these are two great products. And I do use them with my patients, and a lot of patients have really good results with them. You need to take a relatively high dose though. So if you're just taking, kind of like anything else, if you just take it once in a while, it's not going to work well. And I always think about, with any sort of supplement, think of it in the same way. Everything has to be dose dependent. So you think about Tylenol. If you want to take Tylenol for a headache and you take a really small amount, it's not going to help your headache. If you take the perfect amount, it's going to help your headache. If you take too much, you could have liver damage and die. And so we want that kind of perfect dose for you. And the same thing goes for kind of all of our treatments. I talk about this a lot, that, if I'm going for a run with two other people, and I only run when I'm running to a gate at the airport, and I'm running with someone that does 10Ks all the time, and then I'm running with someone that does marathons all the time, and we go for a 10-mile run, the 10K person is going to feel like they got a good workout. The marathoner might feel like they didn't do anything. I might not be able to walk, and I might end up in the hospital. And that's all with that same amount. And so everything that we do, we want to meet everyone exactly where they are. And so that's something that's really important, I think, with the way that we look at things with precision medicine, is looking at, like, what is going to be perfect for you, which is going to be different for me, which is going to be different from the next person. Another supplement that we like to use that's helpful for increasing REM sleep is phosphatidylcholine. Most of the Quicksilver supplements that we use have phosphatidylcholine in it already, and we can also do just phosphatidylcholine by itself. A lot of the times we use the Quicksilver supplements because a lot of people have disruptions in their gut, inflammation in their gut, and they're not going to absorb pills very well. So the liposomal forms can be more expensive, but I look at, hey, if you're actually getting it into your body and it's more bioavailable, not quite as good as an IV, but pretty good, that's going to actually end up being more cost effective. GABA is another great one to help with sleep and just help your nervous system relax in general. So GABA is our chill out neurotransmitter, as opposed to glutamate, which is our excitatory neurotransmitter. You can get GABA as a supplement, like you can see on this page here. So that's something that the Sleep Synergies that I use has GABA in it. You could squirt just this with the L-theanine, and that's going to kind of help your nervous system to relax. Other treatments that we do are ketamine drips, and ketamine, which you may or may not have heard of, is a psychedelic that is used for treatment-resistant depression and for pain. And really what's happening on a neurochemical level is we're increasing the amount of GABA and decreasing the amount of glutamate. So oftentimes when patients do ketamine drips over time, that improves their sleep as well, because it's improving their GABA. Magnesium, a lot of people have heard of magnesium for sleep. So magnesium helps to regulate neurotransmitters that are related to sleep, helps you to fall asleep better, helps you to stay asleep better, improves your quality of sleep. It's also helpful for restless leg syndrome, which a lot of times people who have that will stay awake and won't be able to sleep well. There's lots of different kinds of magnesium. So a couple of years ago, I didn't have my magnesium with me. I went to, I think, a Whole Foods, and I was looking around. I realized most of the magnesium that even at Whole Foods is magnesium citrate. Magnesium citrate is great if you want some help with your bowel movements, but it's not as great in terms of bioavailability into your brain and in terms of how it's going to help with your sleep. And so magnesium threonate is the one that actually has the best penetration to your brain. So I usually recommend that, or magnesium glycinate. And it's just important with supplements to realize that not all supplements are the same, and the supplement industry is huge, and you can get super overwhelmed. You can go to the store and see all these different supplements, like magnesium, for example, And even someone who's been trained in it, it can be really hard to figure out which one is good and which one's not. There's a great website called Consumer Labs, which does third-party testing. And unfortunately, a lot of supplements also will have heavy metals and other toxins and fillers in them. The supplement industry is not really regulated very much compared to the pharmaceuticals, for example. And so you really want to make sure that you're getting quality supplements. And so I always recommend having either a doctor or someone that is that understands which supplement companies adhere to what's called a good manufacturing process. So if nothing else, if you look for supplement bottles that have GMP on it, you're probably going to be going in the right direction. Other molecules that can help with sleep: chamomile, valerian, tryptophan, lavender. You can use essential oils, teas. There are all sorts of different ways that these various herbs can help you. All right, so now let's move on to some sleep tips and tricks and hacks. So some hacks, again, going back to our ancestors, that the cold in the night would kind of initiate the cascade into falling asleep. One way that you can do that is certainly to go for a walk outside at night if it's cold, but it might not be cold where you are, or it might be too cold. So something you can do is take a cold and hot shower. So you can take a hot shower, a normal shower, and then switch it to cold for a while. I would be wary about switching it too cold. So I do a lot of Wim Hof practices. And for a while I was doing really, really cold showers at night. And what I realized is I think that was actually stimulating stress hormone production. It was probably having the opposite effect on my sleep. So I think cold enough to cool your body, but not to stimulate that stress response. And then ending on hot is good, because if you end on cold, your blood vessels are going to dilate, and that's actually going to help you to warm up again. And if you want to stay cool, what you do is get hot at the end. It's going to keep your blood vessels, sorry, I should have said blood vessels constrict, and they'll get you hot again. If you end on the hot, it'll dilate your blood vessels, which will let off more heat and keep you cool. Things like meditation, yoga nidra, the 4-7-8 breath, those will all help you to get into parasympathetic. The PMF machines, pulsed electromagnetic fields. So those are machines that are kind of designed to charge your cells. We have PMF machines at the Boost offices. I think of them as kind of giving your cells whatever they need to optimize their processes. And so sleep is no different from that. And there is evidence that PMF does help with sleep. Looking at different beds. So the problem could be that you have an old bed, or your bed's too soft or too hard for your particular body. So looking into that, making sure that you have a cool room. And so that Uller that I talked about earlier, which is that cooling mattress, can be helpful. Cognitive behavioral therapy, there's tons of evidence on that for sleep. I think the main take home for that is that if you're lying in bed and you can't sleep, get up. Don't stay in bed. Get up, go read in the other room until you're tired again. And then only having your bed be for sleep and sex. So if you are doing other things in bed, then your body and your mind are not associating that with sleep. So, and then when you wake up in the night, your body is not associating that with sleep. So again, if you're lying there in bed for 2 hours awake every night, your body's going to start associating that, okay, bed's maybe not sleep. So as soon as you wake up and can't get right back to sleep, go into the other room and read. Alcohol, a lot of people will think, oh, alcohol helps me to sleep. It is a sedative and will help you to fall asleep, but it actually does not help you to have good restorative sleep at all. And I think most people know that just from experience. And then eating right before bed as well is not good for sleep. It's not good for initiating deep sleep, and it can also end up causing blood sugar swings. Something on that note, particularly with women, a lot of times women are carb deficient, don't get enough carbs. And then what can happen is in the middle of the night, the blood sugar drops, and in order to get the blood sugar up, we'll release cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. When we release that, that definitely wakes us up. So when we're trying to figure out what's causing us to not have good sleep, I like biofeedback devices. We'll talk about that. And then other things that can be helpful are wearing a continuous glucose monitor for a period of time. So that is something you can wear for 2 weeks, and then you can see what exactly is happening with your blood sugar at 3 in the morning when you wake up. Some of those blood sugar swings can also be due to kind of a sluggish liver. If your liver is not as optimal as it could be, or as balanced as it could be, that could cause those swings as well. But getting that information, and then you can identify, okay, what can I do to optimize that? All right, talking about falling asleep. So If you're having trouble falling asleep, those blue light blockers, I think, are huge. Box breathing and other breathing exercises like the 4-7-8 breath can be helpful. Meditation is helpful. One thing with meditation, though, to be wary of, meditation, I think actually does a really good job of kind of energizing the body. And so if you meditate, depending on what type of meditation you're doing, if you meditate right before bed, that might actually give you more energy. And so there's certain meditations that can be designed or guided visualizations that can be designed more for sleep. If you're just meditating in general, that potentially could actually wake you up. So just be mindful of that. Having a ritual is super important. So humans are ritualistic. We have been forever. And we know that with our kids, that kids have bedtime routines. If they get messed up, they don't sleep well. Adults are no different. And so you can trick your body. When I did shift work for all those years and I was going to sleep at all different times, I had rituals, and I still stick with them now, that I do every single night. I do some tapping. I use some craniosacral balls. I do some Ayurvedic massage. I do all these things and it signals to my body, because I do it every night before I go to sleep. It signals to my body it's time to go to sleep. So if I travel to another time zone, if I'm going to sleep at a weird time, that will still trigger my body to recognize that it's time to go to sleep. Ayurvedic medicine's been around for 5,000 years. It's out of India. They have all sorts of amazing tools that can help keep our body and get our body in balance. They've got some Banyan botanicals. I'm sure there's lots of others make some great massage oils, and they make some that are great for sleep that have a bunch of adaptogenic and calming herbs. So doing what's called abhyanga, so putting massage oil on your hands, rubbing your feet before you go to sleep, that can be really calming as well. All right, not getting enough sleep. So the two types of sleep that we want to make sure we're getting enough of are deep sleep and REM sleep. So deep sleep is the beginning of the night, REM sleep is the end of the night. Deep sleep, I think of that's like important for our bodies. REM sleep is important for our brains. And I'm distilling, we could spend an entire year talking about sleep. I'm distilling this down into a little over a half an hour. So if we're not getting enough deep sleep, what are the moves there? Going to bed earlier, oftentimes will be a good adjustment for that. And then making sure that you have an optimal environment. So cold enough environment, dark, quiet, all of that are often the things that are going to impact your deep sleep. The Uller can be really nice. If it's cold when you're getting in bed, you can have it start warm and then have it cool down, and that will trigger you to go into deep sleep. If you're not getting enough REM sleep, that's kind of on the opposite end. You want to make sure that you can sleep in. So if you set an alarm every morning and you wake up and you kind of feel groggy, it's probably because you're waking up in the middle of your REM sleep. So if you can extend the amount of time in bed, that's going to be helpful. And then phosphatidylcholine is a supplement that can help extend your REM sleep as well. All right, if your problem is staying asleep, that's kind of looking at what's happening with your chronotype. Are you sleeping at the right time of day or right time of night, I guess I should say, and then also looking at environmental clues. So looking at your chronotype. So if I am a lion, for example, lions again, ideally go to bed at 9 p.m., wake up at 5 a.m. If I'm a lion and I'm sleeping in a household of a bunch of wolves that are going to bed at midnight and I'm going to bed at midnight, that's probably why I can't stay asleep, because probably I'm waking up at 5 in the morning because my body wants to wake up at 5 in the morning. And so sometimes that means that we need to adjust our schedules. So that sometimes that means we're not going to bed the same time as our partners, and that's okay. If other things to look at is our what we've talked about before, is our room dark enough? Is it cool enough? Is it quiet enough? Other things, anything that we do during the day is going to impact what we do at night. We've all heard you don't want to go to sleep mad. You don't want to have a fight right before bed. And part of that is that stress is going to keep us awake and wake us up. Breathing exercises to help us calm down, meditation during the day. I think of, so say you have 100 units of stress every day that you're adding into your body. And if that stress is overflowing, you're not going to be able to sleep well at night. So anything that you can do to decrease stress during the day is going to make it so you're not overflowing. So meditation is a great thing. Breathing exercises, all those things are going to decrease that stress so you're not overflowing at night and it's not keeping you up at night. I like this summary. We give our patients all sorts of handouts in our portal that they can either look at or download. And this is kind of a nice summary that we give people some strategies for serene sleep. It just kind of summarizes a lot of what we've been talking about, but just to kind of go over it again. So ritualizing the rhythms of activity and rest. So meaning, you know, when you wake up in the morning, get outside, get some light, and then really at the end of the day, try calming your system down. Use dusk and darkness as sleep medicine. So think, work, try and live like our ancestors. So when it's getting dark out, try and calm your body down. Quiet your body noise. Do anything that you can to kind of relax your nervous system. Creating a sleep sanctuary that's dark and quiet and cool, and that you're only using it for sleep. And then learning to surrender to sleep. So we are kind of in this like instant gratification society now. And what ends up happening with that is we want everything right away, including sleep. So we think that as soon as we get into bed and our heads hit the pillow, we should fall asleep immediately. And the reality is, for a lot of us who have been sleep deprived for years and years, certainly when I was working shift work, that happened all the time. I would just fall asleep right away. But the reality is, really, we should probably be taking more like 10, 15, 20 minutes to fall asleep. That's normal. And just surrendering into that. If we fight it, everyone knows if you try and fight sleep, it's much harder to fall asleep. And then don't battle nighttime wakefulness. If you wake up at night and you don't fall asleep pretty quickly, go in the other room and read. Try and have some blue light blocking glasses near your bedside. Have maybe a red light bulb in a light in the other room, and just go in there and read until you feel tired again. And that can be frustrating, but over time, that's going to train your body that like the bed is just for sleep. And then arising mindfully with intention in the morning. So when you wake up in the morning, again, like getting outside, doing breathing exercises, kind of getting those day hormones going right away. What you do first thing in the morning really does impact your sleep at night. All right. So now let's talk a little bit about tracking sleep with biofeedback devices. So there are lots of biofeedback devices out there. The two of the most common ones I think people have heard of are the Whoop and the Oura Ring. I think the Oura Ring's probably better for tracking sleep. The Whoop is maybe better for exercise, but really it probably comes down to, I have an Oura Ring. I had a Whoop for a bit, but it's really, do you like a ring better, or do you like a bracelet better? I like having objective data, and you can kind of do your own experiment. So you can see what happens to your sleep. For example, if you eat later, if you eat certain things, if you don't get enough exercise, if you get too much exercise, all these things will allow you to kind of see over time when you get the best sleep. Also, what time you go to sleep. So you might notice that over time, that when the best sleep that you get is when you go to bed at 11 p.m. So maybe you're right there in the bears, or maybe you find that occasionally when you go to sleep at 9 p.m., which isn't that often, that actually that's way better. So I think it just gives us some data to figure out what works best for us. Also with using molecules, and I always recommend don't change too many variables at once. So if you're having trouble sleeping and you add a bunch of things at once and then you're sleeping better, who knows what actually allowed you to sleep better. One thing I didn't mention before with hormones as well is a lot of women end up having an estrogen progesterone imbalance, and progesterone is a really nice chill out, helps us sleep hormone. So if our progesterone levels are not high enough, then we're not going to sleep well. And then also really as soon as we reach our 40s and the hormones start changing a little bit, low estrogen can also affect sleep as well. So hormones are super important to sleep as well. And we can replace them as we get older with bioidentical hormone replacement. And there's also adaptogens that we can do to help optimize them. Adaptogens are herbs that basically help our body to be optimal, whether that means like, if you have too much estrogen, it'll help decrease it. If you don't have enough, it'll help increase it. All right, now I'm just going to talk about a couple cutting edge treatments that can help with sleep as well. So I'm going to talk about stellate ganglion blocks and peptides. So we do a lot of stellate ganglion and vagus nerve blocks, and probably a lot of you have heard me talk about this, but I think it's worthwhile to talk about again. So if you think about your computer, if it has too many apps open, you get that spinning wheel of death, everything just freezes. Your move is to reboot the computer. It closes all those apps, and then when it opens up, it moves smoothly again. The same type of thing can happen with our nervous system. When we're constantly stuck in the future or the past, we're not really able to focus on what's happening currently, and we just get stuck in flight fight. And what that looks like is all of our blood is going to our extremities so we can outrun a saber-toothed tiger. It's not going to our organs, and our hormones get all out of whack, and we don't, amongst other things, we don't sleep really well. So one thing we can do is do a block, and it's basically an injection in the neck. The procedure takes 5 to 10 minutes. It's a really quick procedure. And it's kind of like the equivalent of rebooting your computer for your autonomic nervous system. And what it does is it just kind of calms down that flight fight, helps us to get into parasympathetic, which allows us to sleep better. Sometimes when people get it the first night or two, they might have some disrupted sleep, but most people, when they get the blocks, and I usually recommend that they do one side one day, another side another day, most people end up having improved sleep over time. Another benefit, just again, since we're still in the pandemic, is there's evidence that these blocks are actually effective for helping with long haul symptoms. So, and I think that's just because when we're in sympathetic too much, we can't heal. We need to be in parasympathetic, which is our rest and digest autonomic nervous system, in order to heal. And when we're in sympathetic, we can't heal optimally. Peptides are amino acid sequences that act on various organs in the body. The most common one that most people have heard about is insulin. We have tons and tons of them that we use, and lots more that are out there. A couple that can be helpful for sleep are the DSIP, which is delta sleep inducing peptide. And then another one are all the human growth hormone precursors, CJC, ipamorelin, sermorelin, tesamorelin, as opposed to the stellate ganglion block, where it's kind of like, I think of all the procedures and treatments I do, the stellate ganglion block is kind of the most bang for your buck. It's a reboot, and then people notice a difference right away. With the peptides, oftentimes it takes a couple of months of using them before people notice a difference, and it does require injections. However, when people have been struggling with sleep for a long time, or have things that are getting in the way of their sleep, such as shift work, things like that, the peptides can be super helpful, and they definitely do work. All right. So summary, today we talked about what an integrative approach means, why does sleep matter, some behavioral interventions for sleep, chronotypes of sleep, the genomics of sleep, molecules that can help us with sleep, sleep tips and tricks and hacks, tracking sleep with biofeedback, and some cutting edge treatments. If you're interested in learning more, my next step that I would recommend is that you read the book or listen to the audiobook of Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. Matthew Walker is, he's on faculty at University of California at Berkeley. He's a sleep scientist. And I think this book, there's tons of books on sleep, but I think this book is a really great, easy to digest book, whether you're a doctor or whether you don't really have any medical training whatsoever or scientific knowledge. It's helpful for everyone kind of understanding why sleep is so important. And he actually argues that no one should be having caffeine because it's going to impact everyone's sleep. All right. So now what I would like is for everyone to put in the chat box one health measure that sleep is associated with. I'll give everyone a minute to do that. And then I'm going to bring Em on, and she's going to talk about the chat box summary before and after in terms of health measures associated with sleep, and any questions that people have that I can answer.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I learned a lot listening to that myself, and we're getting some great questions and comments in the chat box. A lot of people understanding that things like Alzheimer's, we've got weight gain and loss, weight regulation, heart disease, blood sugar regulation, autoimmunity, mental acuity, athletic performance, dementia. A lot of people pointing out the cognitive effects of sleep. Thank you for all those contributions to the chat box. There are a lot of questions here. We probably only have time for one. We're a little over our time. So maybe I'll ask, there's some version of this question that's come up a couple times, and it's, can you speak to the benefits of sleeping in one big chunk versus phased sleep?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. And this has come up a lot recently. I've noticed several articles on this, sort of blaming the Industrial Revolution on our current sleep problems. And the idea is that some people will argue that back to like, how did our ancestors live? That what we should be doing, what we did historically, was sleep in smaller chunks, like more smaller chunks instead of these big chunks. And that part of the reason what we're doing now isn't working is that the Industrial Revolution kind of forced us to do more of a, 8 to 5 work schedule and then sleep at night. And what our ancestors would do, would be, they'd be out and about at dusk and dawn, have a nap in the day, and then sleep at night, but be up some of the night as well, tending the fire, etc. And I think the jury's still out on it now. I think if you have the luxury, I think a lot of us don't have the luxury if we're working kind of normal hours. When we talk about the chronotypes, it's interesting that our society kind of forces us into these schedules. And we know there's a lot of evidence now, for example, with high school students, that like high school students do way better when high school starts at like 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. versus at 7 a.m. Because they get more sleep when it starts later. And unfortunately, our society does force a lot of us into a schedule that might not be consistent with our chronotype and what's optimal for our health. And I would say particularly if you have a biofeedback device like an Oura Ring, and if you have the luxury to be able to explore playing with like taking a nap in the afternoon and having less sleep at night, or not as big of a chunk at night, I'd say go for it and check it out. I don't think that we have enough evidence right now to say, which is better one way or the other. I think we can probably all agree that we do need probably between 7 and 9 hours of sleep total, but whether or not that means that, it's okay to do 2 hours during the day and 6 at night, or whether it should all be at once, I think the jury's still out on that. So I'd say like, get out there if you can, explore it yourself. And I love these questions, and super grateful for everyone showing up today. Any of the other questions that we didn't get to, we're going to send out a copy of this webinar and we'll post it on YouTube. And what I'll do is I'll respond to the questions in written form when I send out the copy of the webinar. Thanks, Em.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for everyone for joining today. And thanks to you, Dr. Alison Mulcahy. Hope to see you again next month.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, well, what do I do with the recording? Okay, I just don't want to lose it.